Welcome back to Scripture Horror. Tonight, I'm bringing you 6 of the most unsettling true Alaska missing hiker cases that will genuinely send chills down your spine. These aren't legends or campfire tales. These happen to ordinary people just like us. Folks who work normal jobs, delivery drivers, shop employees, weekend adventurers who saved up for a trip, packed some gear, and set out into the vast Alaskan wilderness looking for a little excitement. But what they stumbled into was far worse than getting turned around on a trail or spotting a grizzly. Some found themselves stalked by something they couldn't identify. Others crossed paths with dangerous people hiding deep in the backcountry, and a few only made it out because luck, or something else, intervened. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to Scripture Horror and tap that bell so you don't miss any of our terrifying true story episodes. After this one, you might reconsider ever hiking alone again. Let's get started. These are 7 real accounts from people who walked into Alaska's wild and came back forever changed. My name is Alex Martinez, and I've been delivering pizzas in Sacramento for years. I know every alleyway, every rundown apartment, every shortcut you can take when the streets are packed or when you just want to get home before midnight. I've delivered to crack houses where the windows were covered in cardboard, walked through gang territory with $100 in my pocket without flinching, and handed steaming pizzas to people who looked like they hadn't slept in a week. Pizza delivery isn't glamorous, but it pays for college, and it keeps me moving. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic with more miles than I care to admit, and my GPS is practically glued to my hand. I thought I'd seen danger. I thought I understood fear. But what happened in Alaska last August destroyed every assumption I had about being alone. There are things out there that watch us, things that know us in ways we don't understand. I'd always wanted to try real backpacking, not just the small trails and day hikes around California. I wanted the untouched silence of real wilderness, the kind you see in documentaries where the nearest person is 100 miles away. I saved for months, bought all the gear I thought I needed, and planned a solo trip to Alaska. My friends laughed at me. "Alex, you deliver pizza for a living. You're not some wilderness survival expert." But I wanted to prove something to myself. I picked the No Attack National Preserve because it was practically empty. No trails, no cell towers, no people. Just tundra stretching farther than the eye could see. It was supposed to be beautiful, peaceful, life-changing. I flew into Anchorage, then took a small plane to a tiny place called Katsu. From there, a bush pilot flew me to a remote lake with 8 days of food and a plan to hike across untouched wilderness. The pilot was this old guy with sun-wrinkled skin and a voice like gravel. When he dropped me off, he didn't even cut the engine before asking, "You sure about this, kid? It's real empty out here." I told him I was sure. I wasn't. But pride makes you say stupid things. The first 2 days were perfect. Blue skies, cool air, gear working exactly how it should, and nothing but open tundra stretching out in every direction. I navigated with a compass and GPS, feeling proud of myself every time I hit a landmark. No trees anywhere, just shrubs, rocks, and a sky that stretched forever. At night, I set up my tent and watched the painted sunset turn gold, then red, then purple. I felt like a true adventurer, like I'd finally belonged somewhere. But on the 3rd day, I woke up wrong. My eyes snapped open like someone had whispered my name. I lay there in my sleeping bag, heart racing, with this heavy pressure in my chest. There's a feeling you get sometimes in crowded places, like a stranger is watching you from across the room. This was that same feeling, except I was in the middle of the tundra, alone in every direction. Something was paying attention to me. I got out of my tent, slowly turning around, scanning the horizon. Nothing but moss, rocks, and sky. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the isolation. But that uneasy feeling followed me the entire day. Every step I took, it grew heavier. Every time I stopped to check my map, it tightened like a fist around my ribs. I started snapping pictures randomly left right behind me, far ahead, trying to calm myself with logic. The camera didn't lie, right? That evening, when I finally checked the pictures, my hands went cold. In 3 different photos, on a distant hill, there was something standing upright. At first glance, it could have been a rock or a crooked tree stump. But when I zoomed in, the shape sharpened into something unmistakably human, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Like someone had grabbed a person and stretched them upward until their limbs looked unnatural. I stared at those pictures for so long my eyes started to hurt. The figure wasn't close, but it was there. In every shot it faced me, watching. I'd barely slept that night. Every sound became a threat. The tent walls flapping in the wind felt like footsteps circling me. My flashlight stayed in my hand, shaking, while I listened to the silence stretch into something unbearable. Twice, I crawled out of my tent with the light pointed into the darkness. Nothing. The next morning, I started taking pictures every few minutes. I didn't even try to hide it anymore. Fear had glued the camera to my hand. The results made me sick. The figure was always there somewhere. Sometimes it was far in the background, a dark, stick-like shape on a ridge. Other times it was closer, so close the shape of its limbs was unmistakable. And the closer it appeared in the photos, the more details I noticed. Its arms hung nearly to its knees. Its legs were long, too long. Its head was large and moved strangely, angled slightly like it was scanning the horizon independent from its body. Every time I moved, it adjusted. Every time I stopped, it took a new position. On the fifth day, I didn't need the camera anymore. I saw it with my own eyes. A tall, dark figure standing motionless on a ridge, facing me directly. I waved at it in some pathetic attempt to prove it was just a person. It didn't wave back. It didn't even twitch. But when I walked, it followed from a distance so exact it felt calculated. My eating slowed. My sleep nearly stopped. My compass shook in my hands each time I picked it up. Every breath became a countdown. Every step a question, when would it come closer? But it never did. It just watched. One night, desperate and exhausted, I tried to outsmart it. I set up my tent in the open as usual, but instead of sleeping inside it, I hid behind a cluster of rocks about 30 yards away. My camera took photos automatically all night. I curled up under my sleeping bag and listened to the endless wind, praying the figure wouldn't notice the deception. The next morning, I checked the photos. Around midnight, the figure approached my tent, not rapidly, slowly, patiently, with long, deliberate steps. It stood inches from the fabric for hours, unmoving, as if listening for breath inside. And then, this part made my skin crawl. It turned away from the tent and began searching the area in widening circles, like it knew I wasn't where I should have been. By dawn, it had repositioned itself on a hill overlooking my real sleeping spot. How did it track me? There were no footprints in the hard tundra. The wind erased every scent. But somehow, this thing always knew exactly where I was. Always. By day 7, I was unraveling. I talked to myself out loud just to break the suffocating silence. And the worst part was the creeping suspicion that the figure was learning from me, listening, studying. Every time I ate, it observed. Every time I rested, it watched without blinking. When I pointed my camera at it, it stood perfectly still like it was posing. This wasn't an animal. This was intelligence. Cold, patient intelligence. On day 8, I snapped. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely activate my emergency beacon. I didn't care about the adventure anymore, or proving anything to anyone. I just wanted out. The rescue service told me a helicopter would arrive in 4 hours. 4 hours felt like 4 lifetimes. I found a flat area for the helicopter to land. As soon as I sat down, the figure positioned itself on a ridge where I could see everything. I watched it as I waited, forcing myself not to look away. For hours, it remained completely still, like a statue carved from shadow. When I finally heard the helicopter blades in the distance, my heart surged with relief. I looked up at the ridge. It was gone. No movement, no shape, no sign it had ever been there. I spun around, taking picture after picture just like before. Nothing. The helicopter landed. The crew helped me inside. I talked too fast, trying to explain what had happened, shoving the camera toward them. The rescue workers exchanged looks I couldn't decipher. One of them radioed back to base using codes I didn't understand. Back in Katsu, a Park Service investigator interviewed me. I showed him every picture. He studied them quietly for a long time before making a few phone calls. When he sat down again, his voice dropped. "You're not the first person to see this," he told me. 10 other hikers had reported similar encounters in the last 20 years. The description was always the same: a tall, thin figure that followed from a distance, never attacked, never communicated, just watched. "What is it?" I asked. "We don't know," he said. "It's not any known animal. It doesn't behave like a human. Some researchers think it may be something that evolved separately, something adapted to surviving in the empty places where humans never go." Then he added something that froze my blood. 3 of the hikers who reported encounters came back for return trips. All 3 vanished, campsites found intact, gear untouched, no bodies. I flew home the next day. The photos are still on my camera. Wildlife experts, photographers, paranormal researchers, they've all told me the same thing: the figure is real. It's not a trick. It's not a shadow. It's something. But the part that keeps me awake isn't the pictures. It's the letter I got last month from the National Park Service. They want me to return to Alaska as part of a research team studying these encounters. They're offering more money than I've ever seen, but I won't go back. Because I know that thing is still out there. It watched me for days. It learned me, how I walk, how I breathe, how I react when I'm terrified. And sometimes, when I'm out late delivering pizzas through empty Sacramento backroads, I feel it again, that pressure, that awareness, that cold gaze at the edge of my vision. I check my mirrors constantly now. I take new routes home every night. And sometimes, just for a split second, I swear I see a tall, thin shape standing motionless far behind me. But when I turn to look straight at it, it's gone. Just like Alaska. My name is Jenny Martinez, and I'm 27 years old. I work as a cashier at Target in Denver, Colorado. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not exciting, but it pays the bills while I save up for the things I actually want in life. I've been working there for 3 years, scanning barcodes, dealing with customers, and carefully setting aside whatever extra money I could. For months, I've been saving for something special. My first solo trip. I had never traveled alone before, and I wanted to prove to myself that maybe, for once, I could be brave. That I could be independent. That I could do something bigger than ringing up groceries for strangers. After spending weeks browsing travel sites, watching videos, and reading reviews, I chose Alaska. Wild. Beautiful. Isolated. Everything I thought I wanted. I planned a simple 4-day hiking trip in Chugach State Park, not far from Anchorage. Nothing extreme, just easy trails, camping under the stars, and taking 1,000 pictures. I bought all my gear: a tent, sleeping bag, hiking boots, a big backpack. I watched YouTube videos about camping safety until I could recite them in my sleep. And of course, I posted everything online. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Pictures of my brand new gear, screenshots of the trails I wanted to hike, and a countdown to my departure. Solo adventure to Alaska, I wrote. 4 days in the wilderness. Ready to disconnect. My friends flooded the comments with emojis and praise. I felt excited, proud, and now, looking back, painfully stupid. The flight to Anchorage was the first time I'd ever flown alone. I felt like an actual adult as I picked up my rental car and drove toward Chugach State Park. The mountains were massive, unreal, like something pulled out of a movie. I found the trailhead for my first day, tightened the straps on my backpack, and stepped into the trees. It was perfect fresh air, towering pines, and birds whose calls I didn't recognize. I stopped constantly to take photos and upload them. Day 1 in paradise, I captioned a selfie. About 2 miles in, I noticed something strapped to a tree. A trail camera. At first, I didn't think much of it. Researchers used them all the time. But this one was angled directly at the hiking trail, not at an animal path. Perfectly positioned to film hikers. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe they were counting how many people used the trail. I even took a selfie with it, posted it with a joke about Alaska's wildlife needing security cameras. That night, at a designated campsite about 4 miles from the trailhead, everything seemed peaceful. A small stream, tall trees, the orange glow of sunset. I cooked dinner and felt proud of myself for actually doing this. But while brushing my teeth, I spotted another camera mounted on a tree at the edge of the campsite. This one was aimed directly at the camping area, pointed right where people pitched their tents. A red light blinked every few seconds. It wasn't cheap equipment. It had a solar panel, weatherproof casing, professional gear, same brand as the one from earlier. It made my skin crawl to think someone was filming me while I slept. So I tied my bandana over the lens and moved my tent 30 yards away, somewhere the camera couldn't see me. The next morning, the bandana was gone, just lying in the dirt below the tree, and the red light blinked like nothing had happened. Someone had removed it. Someone had walked into my campsite while I was asleep. I tried to calm myself, telling my brain it was probably a park ranger checking equipment. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me as I packed up and continued hiking. And as the day went on, I noticed more cameras, at every water source, every rest area, every scenic overlook, always at eye level, always placed where solo female hikers would naturally pause, places where someone might change clothes behind a tree or stop to eat or filter water. By the end of the second day, I had counted 17 cameras. Something was wrong. This wasn't wildlife research. These cameras were watching women. On my final day, hiking back toward the trailhead, I found something that made my stomach drop. Another camera. But beneath it, taped to the tree, was a clear plastic bag. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. They were photos of me. Sleeping in my tent, changing my clothes behind a tree, squatting behind bushes to use the bathroom. Viewed through night vision cameras. Viewed up close. Viewed from angles no random hiker could have seen me from. And they weren't all of me. There were photos of other women, young, alone, just like me. Some were bathing in streams, some were changing inside tents. Some were clearly terrified in later photos, looking around like they knew something was wrong. Then I saw a woman I recognized, Amy Rodriguez, the missing teacher from Phoenix whose flyers I'd seen around Anchorage. She had disappeared a month earlier. Her photo timeline told a story no one ever reported. It started like mine, normal hiking selfies. Then photos of her looking confused and scared. Then running. Then tied up. Crying. Tape over her mouth. The final photo showed her in a basement, time-stamped the day she was reported missing. My hands shook violently. I knew exactly what these images meant. I forced myself to take pictures of every single one with my phone. This was evidence. Evidence that could save someone or convict someone. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, fast. Crashing through brush toward me. Someone was coming. I shoved everything into my pockets and ran. I didn't care that my backpack was heavy. I dropped it. I didn't care that I was 4 miles from the parking lot. I just knew I had to get out of the forest alive. Whoever was behind me didn't bother hiding. Branches snapped with every step. They were gaining on me. Each time I stopped to gasp for air, they stopped too, like they were listening, hunting, enjoying this. When I finally stumbled into the parking lot, breathless and shaking, my heart sank. My rental car was destroyed. All 4 tires slashed, every window smashed. My luggage dumped across the pavement, and in bright red spray paint across the windshield, "You're in the collection now, Jenny from Denver." He knew my name. My city. Everything I'd ever posted online. I was trapped, alone, signal-less, and hunted. I hid in the woods for hours, too terrified to breathe. Every crunch of leaves felt like it was him, coming to drag me away like he had dragged those other women. When an older hiker named Bill showed up near sunset, I burst out, sobbing, begging him to call the police. He stayed with me until the troopers arrived. If he hadn't, I don't think I'd be alive. The Alaska State Troopers took my report seriously. Amy Rodriguez's case, and others, were already under investigation. When I showed them the photos and GPS locations, they launched a search. By the next day, they had found every camera I documented, and 20 more hidden across the trail system. More than 30 cameras covering almost 30 square miles, all pointed at women. But the worst part was what they found near the spot where I discovered the photographs. A bunker. Hidden in the hillside, camouflaged so well that hikers had probably walked past it for years. Inside were surveillance monitors, computers, storage drives, and thousands of printed photographs covering the walls. Every inch was filled with images of unsuspecting women undressing, sleeping, bathing, hiking alone. Each victim had a file with detailed personal information, names, hometowns, social media screenshots, family details, schedules. Everything pulled from posts just like mine. There were hunting plans, maps marking where each victim would be most vulnerable, notes about their physical fitness, hiking experience, when they'd be alone. Along with these, investigators found video files they later described in court as unwatchable. Women being assaulted, tortured, and killed in what appeared to be the same basement from Amy's last photo. DNA evidence led to a suspect, Marcus Webb, a 34-year-old IT technician who installed internet infrastructure in remote areas. His job gave him the perfect excuse to set up solar-powered surveillance systems deep in the wilderness. He stalked women through dating apps and social media, studying their posts for weeks before they arrived. He monitored their movements through cameras. He planned their abductions like some kind of sick wildlife hunter. Police found the basement chamber in his Anchorage home. Inside were personal belongings of multiple missing women, among them Amy Rodriguez's ID. Webb had been selling torture videos on the dark web for thousands of dollars. Some buyers paid up to $20,000 for custom content, requesting specific torture methods. He had screenshots of every post I'd ever made about my trip, notes about my apartment complex, my work hours, my hiking routes. He had chosen me months earlier. I testified at his trial. Webb was convicted on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and production of torture content. He received life without parole. But nothing about that brings back the 19 women who died because they shared their travel plans online. I survived because another hiker walked into that parking lot at the right moment. Since then, I never post my plans online until I'm home. I warn every woman I can. Because the truth is, the wilderness isn't terrifying because of animals. It's terrifying because it's the perfect place for people like him to make someone disappear forever. And all it took was one excited social media post to put me in his crosshairs. My name is Lisa Chen, and I've been working as a waitress at Applebee's in Portland for years. It's not glamorous, but the tips are good enough, and I've always been the kind of person who can talk to anyone. But what really keeps me going isn't customer service or restaurant life. It's photography. Every spare dollar from my shifts went straight into camera gear or my savings jar, the one labeled Alaska. I dreamed about that place since I was a kid watching nature documentaries, imagining those untouched forests and wild landscapes through my own lens. For years, I saved every tip, worked double shifts, sacrificed sleep and meals, and finally scraped together enough for a week-long solo trip to the Tongass National Forest. I planned it obsessively. October was hunting season, which I thought made the forest safer. I assumed more people meant less isolation. I bought all the right gear, bright orange vest, GPS, whistle, professional lenses, extra batteries. I took a survival course. I researched every trail. I thought I had prepared for everything. The flight to Ketchikan was smooth, renting the Jeep was easy, and the 3-hour drive to the forest entrance was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. Spruce trees rose like skyscrapers on both sides, and the mountains vanished into low, rolling clouds. I started my hike early on October 13th, the first real day of my adventure. The air was crisp without being cold, and the cloud cover made the light perfect for dramatic landscape shots. My pack was heavy with equipment, but excitement made it feel weightless. The trail was well marked at first, winding between moss-covered trunks and a forest floor that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. By the afternoon, I reached my first campsite, a tiny clearing by a creek, exactly like the photos I'd studied. I set up my tent, hung my food properly, and spent the evening taking pictures of golden sunlight spilling through the trees. That first night felt magical. Pure. Safe. I fell asleep listening to the creek and woke up more refreshed than I had in months. I thought this trip was finally the reward I'd spent years chasing. On the second day, I hiked deeper into the forest, following a less traveled branch of the main trail. The woods were quiet except for birds and my own footsteps. That's when I heard the first gunshot far off, maybe a mile or two away. I checked my GPS. I was well within the legal hunting area, so I made sure my orange vest was visible and called out, "Hello!" every few minutes the way safety guides recommend. The gunshots continued throughout the day. Single shots, pairs of shots, the occasional cluster of 3. I kept telling myself it was normal hunting behavior. Then I found the gut pile. At first glance, it looked like any field dressing remains, but something about it made my stomach tighten. My uncle used to take me deer hunting in Oregon, so I knew what normal field dressing looked like. This wasn't it. The cuts were far too precise, almost surgical, and only certain organs were removed: heart, liver, kidneys. Everything else that hunters usually take was left behind. Nearby, carved into a tree, were symbols I didn't recognize. Sharp geometric patterns, nothing like trail markers, nothing like anything cultural I'd read about. They radiated outward like a dark sun, and just looking at them made my chest tighten. I photographed everything, telling myself it could be evidence of poaching, but something inside me whispered I should never have found it. I hiked to my second campsite, but the image of that gut pile and those symbols stayed frozen in my mind. When night fell, I was in my tent editing photos when the first gunshot cracked through the forest. This time it was close, maybe half a mile away. Then another shot came from a different direction. Then another. Over the next few hours, I counted at least a dozen shots, all spaced out, all shifting around me. It took me too long to realize the truth. Someone was shooting in a circle around my campsite, always at the same distance, never closer, never farther. When morning came, I walked the perimeter and found bullet holes in trees, each exactly 100 yards from my tent, each at chest height. Whoever did this had perfect aim. They weren't trying to hit me. They were showing me they could. I packed up fast and didn't bother rolling my sleeping bag. I was miles from the trailhead, and the thought of someone silently watching me from the trees made my skin crawl. Instead of heading back on the main trails, I followed a creek bed, hoping to move unpredictably. But the feeling of being watched followed me like a shadow. I picked a random clearing miles away, hidden behind thick spruce trees, thinking no one could have predicted I'd choose it. I was wrong. Fresh symbols were carved into the surrounding trees, the sap still sticky. Bones, deer ribs, a moose skull, smaller unidentifiable pieces, were arranged on the ground in patterns echoing the carvings. The air felt wrong, heavy and cold despite the sunlight. My hands shook as I photographed everything. That's when I heard the voices, not talking. Chanting, soft, rhythmic, layered voices coming from deeper in the forest. Against all reason, I followed them. I wanted evidence. Proof. Something to show authorities if I made it out. The chanting led me to a clearing so hidden I would have walked past it 1,000 times without seeing it. I crouched behind a fallen log and lifted my camera with a telephoto lens. Through the lens, I saw people, around 20 of them, standing around a fire. They wore expensive hunting gear, paired with masks made from real animal skulls, deer, moose, even what looked like a bear. They moved in practiced patterns, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. Mixed with the animal bones were human remains. Skulls. Fresh limbs. Things I didn't want to believe were real. I kept snapping photos, unable to stop even as dread crawled up my spine. These weren't hunters. This wasn't butchering. This was ritual. Then one of them spotted the reflection off my lens. He pointed straight at me and let out a whistle that mimicked a bird call. Instantly, the others responded, splitting off into groups and moving with chilling coordination. They weren't panicking. They were trained. They were hunting me. I ran as fast as I could, branches tearing at my clothes, lungs burning, heart pounding. Behind me, I heard whistles guiding others, directing them the way hunters control the movement of game animals. Every time I veered left, a whistle cut through the trees. When I doubled back, voices surged toward me. They weren't trying to catch me quickly, they were funneling me somewhere. After what felt like forever, I stumbled into another clearing, and I understood why they had driven me there. The clearing was their kill site. An altar of human skulls stood in the center. Bones hung from tree branches like ornaments. Torture devices, rusted metal racks, spikes, knives surrounded the area like a museum of nightmares. I hid behind another fallen log, paralyzed, as more masked figures arrived, at least 30 in total, all armed with high-end rifles. I heard their voices clearly now. "Perfect prey," one said. "We've been tracking her for days." "Good instincts." "The clients will love this one," another replied. "Better than the last two." That's when I understood. This wasn't a cult worshipping something. This was a human hunting operation. They called it the ultimate safari rich people, paying tens of thousands of dollars for the chance to hunt, torture, and kill human beings in remote Alaska, where gunshots during hunting season blended into the background. They had been doing this for years. The symbols were warnings, boundaries, and ritualistic markers. The bones were trophies. They planned to give me a head start before releasing their hunters. They wanted a chase. Entertainment. A show for the clients who couldn't be there in person. While they prepared, I slipped away toward where I'd seen them come from. They had to have vehicles nearby. No one walked this deep carrying that much equipment. I found a hidden service road and 5 ATVs, along with a luxury RV that probably cost more than my apartment building. Inside the RV were torture tools, video equipment, and dozens of labeled tapes documenting previous hunts. Contracts. Payment records showing clients paying $50,000 each. My stomach twisted as I photographed everything. I slashed tires and cut brake lines, hoping to slow them down. But soon I heard shouting. They had discovered what I'd done. They released dogs. The next hours were a blur of running, jumping streams, climbing trees, rubbing myself with wild mint, doing everything I could remember to confuse scent trails. The dogs were relentless. Their handlers were worse. Finally, as sunrise broke, I saw the ranger station through the trees. I crashed through the door and collapsed, gasping for help. The ranger, a woman named Sarah, immediately radioed for assistance. Within hours, state troopers and FBI agents were forming a raid team. I gave them GPS coordinates and handed over my camera. The raid was successful. They arrested 26 people. They found remains of at least 40 victims. The tapes went back years. My photos helped convict them. Most received life sentences, but the nightmares never stopped. I quit my job and moved across the country. I can't camp anymore. I can't walk alone in the woods. Gunshots make my whole body lock up. I still do photography, but only in cities, surrounded by people. The worst part? Knowing how close I came to becoming another tape in their collection, another trophy, and sometimes, late at night, I remember how vast Alaska really is. How many untouched places exist where people disappear and no one ever knows why. The FBI told me they dismantled the whole group. But I don't believe it, because some predators aren't animals. They're people. And for them, the thrill of hunting a human being never dies. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been working as a secretary at Henderson Associates law firm in Chicago for years now. I handle case files, schedule client meetings, and juggle dozens of court dates every week. It's steady work, predictable, structured, and exactly what I needed after my messy breakup with Derek earlier that year. When he cheated on me with his coworker, the humiliation sat in my chest like a stone. I needed something, anything that would make me feel strong again. That was why I planned the Alaska trip. I wanted to prove to myself that I could go somewhere wild and unforgiving and rely on no one but myself. I picked Gates of the Arctic National Park, one of the most remote places in America. No roads, no cell signal. Days could pass without seeing another human being. At the time, that sounded perfect. I flew into Fairbanks on September 10th and boarded the small bush plane to the park entrance. The cold hit me immediately, sharp, thin, biting even through my jacket. Temperatures were already dropping toward freezing at night. Still, I felt ready. I had a sturdy tent, a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, food for 10 days, water purification tablets, and, most importantly, my emergency beacon. The ranger who checked me in repeated the warning twice: no cell signal, no backup communication, and the beacon was my only lifeline. I nodded, confident. I didn't realize how fast confidence could shatter. The first 2 days were everything I dreamed of. Endless mountains stretching into the clouds. Rivers so clear they looked unreal. A silence so complete that it felt like the entire world had paused just for me. I walked miles each day, feeling stronger and lighter with every step. For the first time in months, my thoughts weren't weighed down by Derek or anything else. I felt capable, independent, whole again. On the third day, everything changed. I was crossing a steep slope scattered with loose rocks. My boots had good grip, but sometimes all it takes is one wrong step. One rock shifted beneath my foot, my ankle twisted. I slipped backward. The world flipped upside down, and the back of my skull slammed against a boulder with a crack so loud it vibrated through my teeth. When I opened my eyes, the sky was spinning. My vision blurred, then refocused, then blurred again. Blood ran down my forehead. My stomach heaved every time I tried to sit up. I'd never had a concussion before, but I knew instantly this was bad. In the wilderness, a head injury can kill you long before anyone finds you. With shaking hands, I crawled to my backpack and activated my emergency beacon. The red light began blinking, steady and rhythmic, my last hope. I curled up beside it, clutching my head, trying not to pass out. Hours felt like days. My thoughts fractured and scattered. But then, just as I felt myself slipping into darkness, I heard it, the heavy chop of helicopter rotors echoing across the mountains. Relief rushed through me so fast I almost cried. I was saved. I was going home. The helicopter landed about 30 yards from where I sat. 3 people ran toward me in clean medical uniforms, moving with smooth, practiced urgency. Their jackets had official-looking patches, and they carried oxygen tanks, IV kits, and a portable stretcher. The leader, a tall man with gray hair, spoke calmly as he knelt beside me. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said, using my name before I ever gave it. "I'm Dr. Morrison. We're a wilderness medical research team. We monitor emergency beacons in remote areas." In my dazed, injured state, it made perfect sense. Of course they knew my name. It was on my beacon registration. They cleaned the wound on my head, checked my pupils, asked me memory questions, and set up an IV. When the medication hit my bloodstream, the pain faded to a distant hum. My nausea disappeared. Their equipment looked professional, their movements precise. I felt safe. "You have a moderate concussion, Dr. Cushion." Dr. Morrison said. "We're going to give you fluids and pain medication to help with the symptoms. You're very lucky we found you quickly." Lucky. That word would haunt me later. He explained that my injury was perfect for their research on trauma treatment in remote conditions. In my foggy mental state, that sounded harmless enough. When they asked if I volunteer for their study, promising better medical care and monitoring, I agreed. I signed blurry paperwork I couldn't read through the haze in my vision. Then they loaded me into their helicopter, and I drifted into sleep feeling comforted and protected. When I woke up, everything was wrong. We weren't at a hospital. We weren't even near civilization. The helicopter had brought me to a concrete compound surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers loomed at every corner. Armed security patrolled the perimeter. My stomach dropped. "Where are we?" I asked as they wheeled me down a hallway. "Our research facility, Dr. Comer," Morrison replied, but his voice had changed. It was colder now. Detached. "We handle extremely sensitive studies. Don't worry about the security measures." But the hallways weren't like any medical facility I'd ever seen. Metal doors. Small windows. Holding cells. Rooms filled with surgical equipment that looked more suited for interrogation than healing. Restraint tables. Electrical devices. Tools laid out like instruments of torture. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they rolled me into a room with stainless steel walls. Before I could react, they strapped me to a metal table, thick leather restraints around my wrists, ankles, and chest. IV lines were connected to both arms, and electrodes were stuck to my head. "What are you doing?" I demanded, suddenly fully alert as panic burned through my veins. "Why am I tied down?" Dr. Morrison smiled faintly. There was nothing human in it. "I'm afraid we weren't entirely honest, Sarah," he said. "We're not studying wilderness trauma treatment. We're testing experimental brain surgery and psychiatric medications." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" He gestured casually toward a row of filing cabinets. "Remote wilderness areas are perfect for gathering test subjects. When hikers go missing, authorities assume accidents. No one suspects an illegal research facility." He opened a cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were photos. People strapped to tables, their heads shaved, surgical scars zigzagging across their skulls. Eyes blank. Skin gray. Some pages were stamped terminated. Others read SU subject expired. "We've collected hundreds of subjects from Alaska, Montana, Colorado," he continued, flipping through the files like they were nothing. "Your injury gave us a convenient pretext. I fought the restraints until they cut into my skin. You can't do this. People know where I am." "Actually," he said calmly, "they don't. Your beacon stopped transmitting the moment we retrieved you. As far as anyone knows, you're still missing." He began preparing his instruments. A scalpel, a bone saw, devices I had never seen before. My blood went cold. Today, we'll be testing memory and personality alteration techniques, he said. We'll be removing part of your frontal lobe while you remain conscious. We need to observe real-time reactions to neural trauma. I pulled harder, wrists bleeding. Please, I begged. You don't have to do this. We do, he replied. Our clients are very specific. He lifted a syringe filled with clear liquid. This will keep you awake but paralyzed. As he leaned over me, desperation gave me strength. I twisted my right hand violently, dislocating my thumb. Pain shot up my arm, white-hot, blinding, but the restraint loosened just enough. My hand slipped free. I lunged, grabbed a scalpel from the tray, and slashed across his face. His scream echoed through the room. I freed my other hand, then my legs, cutting through the straps. Alarms blared. Boots thundered in the hallway. Dr. Morrison shouted into a radio, "Security!" Subject escaped from operating room 3. I bolted into the corridor, scalpel in hand, heart racing. I had no idea where I was going. The compound was a maze, corridors branching endlessly, doors slamming open somewhere behind me. I ducked into the first room I found. It was a morgue. Bodies lay on metal tables, each one in worse condition than the last skulls cut open, organs missing, surgical wounds carelessly stitched. Dozens of victims, all hikers, all kidnapped, all experimented on. In the corner, I found communication equipment radios connected to external emergency frequencies. Hands shaking, I grabbed the microphone. "Mayday, Mayday," I said, my voice cracking. "This is Sarah Martinez. I'm being held in an illegal medical facility in Alaska. They're conducting human experiments. Please send help. Please." I repeated the message over and over, even as footsteps closed in. The security teams were searching room by room. They needed me alive, which meant they wouldn't shoot, but they would take me back to that table. Then I heard it. Real helicopters. Multiple. Not the fake medical transport from earlier. Through the morgue window, I saw black tactical helicopters descending. FBI agents rappelled down ropes, storming the compound. Gunshots erupted. Shouts. Chaos. The entire facility fell apart in seconds. I kept calling out until an FBI agent burst into the morgue, weapon raised, shouting for me to stay still. Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly collapsed. The raid exposed one of the largest illegal human experimentation operations in U.S. history. Records showed over 200 subjects abducted over the years, many never found. The facility had been funded by defense contractors developing mind-control drugs, biological agents, and surgical procedures banned in every civilized country. I testified before Congress. Dr. Morrison and his team were sentenced to life in prison. But knowing they're locked away hasn't erased the nightmares. I healed physically. The scar on my forehead faded, but I still sleep with lights on. I carry multiple emergency beacons wherever I go, and I will never again take a solo trip into the wilderness. Because now I understand something I wish I never learned. Sometimes the people who rush to rescue you aren't there to save your life. They're there to take it apart piece by piece. My name is Tom Mitchell, and for 8 years I've been a UPS delivery driver in Seattle. I know every alley, every loading dock, every apartment buzz code from downtown to the suburbs. I've delivered in blizzards, heat waves, blackout zones. Nothing ever rattled me. My coworkers always joked that I was good at my job but terrible at being alone. They said I needed people too much, that I couldn't go anywhere solo, not a movie, not a restaurant, definitely not a vacation. And maybe they were right. But in July, I finally decided to prove them wrong. I planned my first solo camping trip in the most remote wilderness I could think of, Alaska. I wanted silence, solitude, and a chance to show I could survive on my own. What I didn't know was that the real danger wasn't being alone in the wilderness. It was being alone with the wrong people watching. I chose Wrangell St. Elias National Park because it was huge, wild, over 8 million acres of untouched mountains and glaciers. A place where you could walk for days without seeing another human. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed up my brown UPS truck with camping gear and spent 5 days driving north, taking the Alaska Highway through Canada, until the air felt sharper, colder, like the wilderness itself was warning me. When I reached the park's visitor center, the ranger behind the counter gave me a look that wasn't quite concern but wasn't confidence either. She marked my route on the topographic map, double-checked my permits, then paused. "You're hiking alone?" she asked. When I nodded, her expression tightened. "Make sure you check in on your way back. We've had a few solo hikers go missing this summer. Probably nothing, but still." Then she handed me a satellite communicator. "This only works in certain areas, but it's better than nothing." I told myself she was being dramatic. I had researched everything, watched survival videos for months, read guides, packed carefully. I was ready. The first 3 days felt like a dream. Clear skies, wide trails, steady hiking. At night I'd build a fire, eat trout from the lakes, and stare into the enormous quiet that wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of myself. I even checked in with my mom using the satellite device, and she sounded relieved that nothing had gone wrong yet. On the fourth morning, confident and rested, I followed a narrow path down to a stream about half a mile from my camp. The guidebook said the fishing was incredible there, and it was. Deep, slow water, perfect for trout. I cast my line and listened to the stream bubbling around me. Nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt wrong. Then I heard someone shouting, "Help, please help me." My head snapped up. A man stood across the water, maybe 30 yards away. He waved his arms frantically. He looked injured, limping, holding his side as if he were in serious pain. "I'm hurt," he called. "I've been walking for hours. I need help." My first thought was simple: another solo hiker. Maybe he fell. Maybe he ran into wildlife. Maybe he was desperate. The water wasn't that deep. Waist high, maybe. I could wade over in a minute. "Hold on," I shouted back. "I'm coming." I left my rod on the bank and stepped into the freezing water. It was snow-melt cold, sharp enough to sting through my boots. The current was stronger than it looked, tugging at my legs, making every step a slow, deliberate push. Still, I kept going. The closer I got, the more he stopped looking like someone desperate for help. His limp faded. His posture straightened. He wasn't clutching his side anymore. He was just watching me. When I was about 10 feet from the opposite bank, 2 more figures stepped out from behind the bushes, a woman in medical scrubs and a man carrying a small, hard-sided case. Every instinct inside me flared. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. "Thanks for coming over," the injured man said, smiling suddenly. "This makes everything so much easier." I spun, but the woman was already beside me. She jabbed a syringe into my neck. I felt the burn of the drug spreading through me instantly. My vision blurred. My legs turned to water. I couldn't keep my balance. I collapsed onto the rocky bank as she crouched beside me. "Don't worry," she said softly. "You're going to help a lot of people very soon." Those were the last words I heard before everything faded, and I felt myself being dragged into the forest, unable to fight, unable to move, unable to do anything. When I woke up, the world was white. White ceiling, white lights, stainless steel, a chemical smell. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted like metal. I tried to sit up, nothing. My arms and legs refused to move. Thick leather straps pinned me to an operating table. My chest was strapped down too. I couldn't lift my head. I could barely open my eyes. I whispered for help, but my voice felt trapped inside my throat, numb and useless. Footsteps approached. "You're awake? Good." A man in green surgical scrubs stepped into view. He held a clipboard and looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a broken engine. "I'm Dr. Tox." "Reynolds," he said calmly. "You're going to help save some lives today." I tried to form words. Nothing came out. "The paralytic affects your voice and motor control," he explained. "But you can still think clearly. That's important. We need you conscious so your organs stay fresh." He turned the clipboard toward me. My name was printed at the top. Below it was a list of body parts: kidneys, liver, heart, corneas, bone marrow, with prices next to each one. My blood turned cold. "You're a perfect donor," Dr. Reynolds continued. 30 years old, physically healthy. No smoking, no drinking. Your organ matches have already been sold. He walked past me as if discussing a routine purchase order. On either side of the room, I saw other tables, other people strapped down just like me. Their eyes were open, their chests rising and falling shallowly. Some had bandages where kidneys had been taken. Some had tubes inserted. They were alive, forced to remain that way. "We've been running this operation for 10 years, he said, flipping through papers. "We target solo hikers, campers, people like you who disappear without immediate concern. By the time authorities notice, we've harvested everything and disposed of the evidence." A nurse walked over and began drawing lines on my skin with a marker, around my abdomen, across my chest, around my eyes. I tried to twist away, but only a faint twitch moved through my fingertips. The drug was strong, but not permanent. Sensation was returning slowly. The nurse didn't notice. "We monitor permits, social media, trail logs, Dr. Tour logs," Reynolds said casually. "And the injured hiker trick? Works nearly every time. People want to play hero." I tried again to move my fingers. I felt the faintest flicker, weak but real. The nurse leaned over me to adjust my IV. As her stethoscope dangled near my hand, something inside me surged. Pure survival. I grabbed the tubing, wrapping it around her throat. My grip was weak, trembling, but it startled her enough for her to stumble against the table. She clawed at the tubing, choking. "Restrain him, doctor!" Reynolds shouted. 2 other staff rushed toward me. Using the nurse's weight as leverage, I yanked my freed hand toward the buckle on my wrist strap. My fingers fumbled wildly, but the strap loosened. One more pull and snap. It came undone. I kicked blindly as another syringe came toward my arm, knocking it out of the doctor's hand. The nurse fell away gasping as I rolled off the table, my legs barely holding me. The room erupted in chaos. I staggered toward the door, slamming into walls, tripping over equipment. My muscles refused to cooperate, but adrenaline forced them into motion. I shoved through the door and stumbled outside into blinding daylight. The facility wasn't a hospital. It was a cluster of low buildings connected by covered walkways, all surrounding a remote airstrip nestled between mountains. A helicopter and 2 small planes sat on the runway like vultures waiting for a meal. My legs buckled, and I hit the ground hard, dragging myself forward on my elbows. Anything to get away. The nearest plane was locked. I clawed at the door anyway, but it wouldn't budge. Then I saw a small building near the runway with antennas on the roof, an air traffic control shack. I grabbed a rock, smashed the window, and climbed inside. Radios lined the wall, buzzing faintly. Manuals and frequency cards were pinned everywhere. I grabbed the mic with shaking hands. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Tom Mitchell," my voice cracked, barely audible. "I'm being held at an illegal organ harvesting facility. I need immediate help, remote airstrip, somewhere near Wrangell, St. Elias." I kept repeating the message over and over as I barricaded the door with anything I could drag in front of it. Outside, I heard footsteps, voices, the click of tranquilizer guns being readied. They were coming. "There are other victims here, still alive," I said into the radio. "This is an active crime scene. Minutes passed like hours." Then rotor blades. Not one. Several. I pressed my face to the window. Over the mountains, real rescue helicopters appeared. Alaska state troopers. And behind them, black-painted federal choppers. Within minutes, armed FBI agents stormed the airstrip. The medical staff scattered, but they had nowhere to run. The agents raided every building, cutting restraints, carrying survivors out, shouting coordinates and medical status into their comms. In total, they found 14 victims, some already missing organs, some barely alive. Several died shortly after rescue because too much had already been taken. The investigation uncovered everything: flight schedules, payment logs, client lists. Billionaires, politicians, wealthy buyers from overseas. Over 100 victims in 10 years. A multi-million-dollar black market pipeline built on the bodies of people who simply wanted to hike alone. Dr. Time Million. Reynolds and his team received like sentences, but authorities admitted privately that similar operations existed in other remote regions and that solo travelers made easy targets. I spent 2 weeks in an Anchorage hospital recovering from the drugs they'd pumped into me and the nightmare I'd barely escaped. I returned home physically intact but mentally changed. I still work for UPS, but I never go anywhere alone now. I tell people exactly where I am, where I'm going, and when I'll be back. I used to think the wilderness was dangerous because of the animals or the weather or the isolation, but now I know better. The real danger is the people who see solo travelers not as humans, but as inventory. And they're still out there. Watching. Waiting. Looking for someone just like me. Looking for someone just like you. My name is Carlos Martinez, and I've been doing construction in Las Vegas long enough that nothing about heat, heavy lifting, or long shifts surprises me anymore. I built casinos, hotels, apartment complexes, towering structures made of steel and sweat. Hard work doesn't scare me. Noise doesn't scare me. Crowds don't scare me. What does scare me is what happened last September on the North Slope of Alaska, a place so empty and quiet that you start to forget the rest of the world even exists. Every year I take one hunting trip, just me and the wilderness. It's the only time I feel like I can breathe after living in a city where the streets never sleep. But last September, that trip became something else entirely. Something I still can't explain. I've been planning that hunt for years, saving money, buying gear that could handle freezing temperatures, testing my equipment over and over. Cold weather hunting isn't something you improvise. One mistake can kill you. I packed a sleeping bag rated for -30, backup batteries for every device, enough food for 10 days even though I only expected to be out there for 7, and my Winchester Magnum, a rifle that had never failed me. When the bushplane pilot, Dave, a guy who looked like he'd been carved out of ice and aviation fuel, asked if I was sure I wanted to be dropped so far from everything, I didn't hesitate. I told him I wanted real isolation. He just shook his head and reminded me not to lose my emergency beacon. Weather changes fast up there, he said. Sometimes faster than a plane can turn around. When he finally left me on that ridge, and the noise of the engine faded into the distance, the silence was so deep it felt like a physical thing. No cars, no voices, no machinery humming somewhere in the background, just wind sliding across the tundra like something alive. I set up camp, took in the endless horizon, and let my brain slow down for the first time in months. It felt perfect. For one day. By the next morning, everything began to shift. I woke before dawn, hiked toward the valley where I'd spotted a herd of caribou the day before, and spent hours moving carefully, quietly, staying downwind and out of sight. When I finally got close enough to take a clean shot, I saw the herd grazing peacefully, except for one caribou standing apart from the rest. It wasn't eating, wasn't moving, wasn't reacting to the others. It was staring directly at me. At first I figured it had caught my scent, but the longer I watched it through my scope, the stranger it felt. I've hunted for years. I know what animals look like when they sense danger. They shift, twitch, sniff the air, perform those tiny instinctive motions that give them away. But this caribou didn't move at all. It was like it was studying me. Like it knew exactly what I was about to do. The eyes bothered me the most. They didn't look wild. They looked aware. Focused. Almost calculating. I lowered my rifle to glass the herd again, and just like that, the strange caribou was gone. No running, no startled reaction, nothing. One moment it was looking at me, the next, the space where it stood was empty. The rest of the herd still grazed like nothing had happened. I tried to hunt the remainder of the day, but something was wrong. No matter where I moved, I kept spotting single caribou watching me from a distance. Half a mile away, maybe more. Perfectly still, every time. And every time I raised my binoculars, they vanished before I could fully focus. It happened again and again, 6 or 7 times at least. Same body shape, same coloring, same posture. It didn't matter what direction I walked, the staring animal always seemed to already be there waiting. By evening, a discomfort I couldn't shake had settled deep in my chest. I've never been someone who panics easily. But something about the way those animals kept appearing and disappearing made my skin crawl. I moved camp 3 miles away from where I'd spent the morning, built a small fire, and tried to focus on something normal like cleaning my rifle. For a moment, it worked, until I heard the calls. At first, the sounds were ordinary enough. Caribou make clicks, grunts, and strange barking noises. But these vocalizations grew more rhythmic the longer I listened. More deliberate. It was like a language. Not random, not instinctive. It sounded like an attempt to communicate. I turned my headlamp toward the darkness and nearly dropped it when I saw the silhouette at the edge of the light. A caribou, except it was standing upright on its hind legs. Balanced. Still, wrong in every possible way. Real caribou can rear up briefly, but they can't just stand like that. This thing stood like it belonged in that posture. When my light hit it, it dropped to all fours and ran, but the movement wasn't natural. It was purposeful, like it wasn't afraid, just caught. I searched the area until I found something far worse than the creature itself. Tracks. Starting as the hoofprints you'd expect from a caribou, but step by step the shape changed. The prints became smaller, rounder. The stride narrowed, and by the time I'd followed the trail a few dozen yards, the tracks were unmistakably human. Barefoot. Adult-sized. The transformation wasn't abrupt. It happened gradually, like bones and muscles were shifting mid-stride. The human footprints led up a small hill, then stopped. No jump marks, no disturbance, no direction. Just stopped. Like the thing making them had simply vanished. I barely slept that night. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every distant call sounded like someone talking. I kept my rifle loaded beside me and stared at the tent walls until morning. When daylight returned, I found something even more terrifying. My rifle had been moved. Not knocked over, moved. I always place it against the same rock, barrel up for safety. But someone had carefully repositioned it. When I woke, it was leaning against the same rock, but now aimed directly where my head had been. Someone, or something, had picked up my gun and pointed it at me while I slept. Human footprints circled my tent. Bare feet. Adult-sized. Dozens of steps. Whatever it was, it had been close enough to touch me. That was it. I packed immediately. Hunting wasn't on my mind anymore. Survival was. As I worked, I noticed a caribou half a mile away on a ridge, standing upright on two legs again, perfectly still, watching. I hiked 6 miles and built a small emergency camp. I wasn't going to hunt. I wasn't going to explore. I was going to wait for my pickup in 5 days and pray nothing approached my tent again. But I did set up my trail camera. If that thing came near me again, I wanted proof. That second night was worse than the first. The footsteps started around midnight. Slow, deliberate, circling the tent just like before. Human footsteps, not hooves. I held my pistol and waited, breathing as quietly as I could. Finally, I snapped. I unzipped my tent with my flashlight in one hand and my pistol in the other. A man stood 10 feet away. At least, something shaped like a man. He was naked, too tall, with limbs slightly too long and skin the color of old leather. His eyes glowed green when my flashlight hit them, like an animal caught in headlights. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. He just watched me. Then he opened his mouth and made the same caribou calls I'd heard in the dark. I shouted for him to leave. He turned and instantly dropped to all fours. His body shifted as he ran. Bones cracked, reshaping. Muscles stretched. Fur grew as he bolted into the darkness, transforming mid-stride until he disappeared as a full caribou. I sat outside my tent until dawn with my pistol ready. Nothing returned. When daylight finally came, I checked the trail camera. The footage captured exactly what I had seen. A caribou approached my tent, paused, and began to change. Bones stretching, fur retreating, limbs twisting. The transformation took almost 2 minutes. By the end, a human figure stood exactly where the animal had been. I activated my emergency beacon immediately. While I waited for the rescue plane, more caribou appeared on the distant hills. Watching. Upright. Still. Coordinated. Like they were communicating. When Dave finally landed, I ran to the plane. As we took off, I looked down and saw at least a dozen caribou staring up at us. On the flight back, Dave told me that native hunters had always spoken about things like this. Shapeshifters. Beings older than humans, studying us for reasons no one understood. He said more hunters had gone missing than anyone wanted to admit. Back in Las Vegas, I showed the footage to biologists. None of them could explain it. They talked about camouflage, illusions, unknown species. But nothing could explain bones changing shape. Nothing could explain a creature becoming human. I researched for months. Other hunters had vanished in areas where similar sightings had been reported. Camps found empty, gear untouched, no tracks except the ones leading in. Never out. I still hunt, but never alone. Sometimes on construction sites, I'll catch a dog standing too still, or a bird watching longer than it should. And every time, I wonder if the things from Alaska can travel, if they can take other forms, if they're still watching, still learning. I keep the trail camera footage on my phone. Most people don't believe it even when they watch it themselves. But I know what I saw. I know what followed me across the tundra. And I know I'll never ever go into the wilderness alone again.